The old Victorian house sat crooked on Maple Street like a broken tooth, its paint peeling and porch sagging under decades of neglect. Sarah Chen clutched the deed in her trembling hands, her 6-month belly pressing against the steering wheel as she stared at what her parents' life insurance money had just bought. Not for herself, but for Marcus Williams' dying grandmother, a woman she'd met just once at the grocery store. What Marcus didn't know was that Sarah wasn't just some grieving daughter with too much heart and too much money. 3 years ago, she'd walked away from her job as an investigative journalist after uncovering a story that nearly got her killed. She'd buried her past, changed her name, and retreated to these quiet mountains to heal. But as Marcus helped his frail grandmother up those rotting porch steps, Sarah noticed the way his hands shook, the fear in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. And when she found the unmarked envelope slipped under her car's windshield wiper that simply read, "Mind your own business," she realized her good deed had just painted a target on her back. What had she stumbled into, and why did helping one family put her unborn child in mortal danger? Sarah's breath fogged the windshield as she watched Marcus gently guide the elderly woman through the front door. Mrs. Williams moved like spun glass, each step calculated and careful. The oxygen tank Marcus wheeled behind her caught the afternoon light, its metal surface gleaming against the house's decay. The memory of their first meeting replayed in Sarah's mind. She'd been reaching for apples at Morrison's Market when she overheard Marcus on the phone, his voice cracking as he explained to someone that the landlord had given them 30 days. His grandmother's medical bills had consumed their rent money again. Sarah had turned, seeing the young man's shoulders shake as he ended the call. Mrs. Williams sat in a wheelchair nearby, her clouded eyes staring at nothing, unaware of the crisis surrounding her. Something in that moment, the tenderness with which Marcus adjusted her blanket, the quiet dignity in her weathered face, had broken something open in Sarah's chest. Her parents' insurance money sat untouched in her account, a sum too large for one person, too heavy with grief to spend on herself. The baby growing inside her would never know its grandparents, but maybe another grandmother could benefit from their legacy. Now, watching the fear in Marcus's movements, Sarah wondered if her impulse had been naive rather than noble. She stepped out of her Honda, legs unsteady after the long drive from her cabin. The threatening note crinkled in her jacket pocket. The paper felt expensive, the block letters written with a careful hand that suggested education and deliberation rather than impulse. "Sarah!" Marcus appeared on the porch, his smile bright but forced. "I can't believe you actually did this. Grandma keeps asking if she's dreaming." Up close, the stress lines around his eyes were more pronounced. Marcus Williams was perhaps 25, with the lean build of someone who worked with his hands and the cautious manner of someone accustomed to disappointment. He'd told her at the market that he was between jobs, picking up construction work when he could find it. "How is she settling in?" Sarah asked, one hand instinctively moving to her belly as the baby shifted. She's amazed. Keeps touching the walls like she can't believe they're real." Marcus's voice caught. "I don't know how to thank you. When you called and said you wanted to buy her a house, I thought it was some kind of scam." Sarah thought the same thing about her own impulse. Buying a house for strangers violated every principle of financial responsibility her parents had taught her. But grief had its own logic, and somehow this gesture felt like the only way to honor their memory that made sense. "Can I see her?" Sarah asked. Marcus hesitated, glancing back at the house. "She's resting." The move was exhausting for her. Another pause. "Maybe tomorrow?" The dismissal felt gentle but firm. Sarah nodded, but unease prickled at her spine. Through the front window she glimpsed a figure moving, too tall and quick to be Mrs. Williams. "Marcus, is everything all right? You seem—" "Fine," he said quickly. "We're fine. Just overwhelmed, you know. This is the nicest thing anyone's ever done for us." A car door slammed somewhere behind them. Sarah turned to see a black sedan parked across the street, its windows tinted dark. She hadn't heard it arrive. "Do you know who that is?" she asked. Marcus glanced at the car, and his face went pale. Probably just neighbors being curious. But the way he gripped the porch railing suggested otherwise. The sedan's engine started, and it pulled away slowly, almost deliberately. Sarah's old instincts stirred, the same ones that had kept her alive when powerful people wanted her investigation buried. Something was wrong here, something that went far beyond a dying grandmother and her struggling grandson. As she walked back to her car, she felt eyes watching from the Victorian's windows. The note in her pocket seemed to burn against her ribs, and for the first time since fleeing her old life, Sarah Chen wondered if her past had finally caught up with her. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Elena sat in her car, staring at the weathered apartment complex. She'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, second-guessing herself. The cashier's check in her purse felt heavier than its paper weight suggested. $150,000 that could have bought her stability, security, a future for the baby growing inside her. Instead, she was about to give it to a complete stranger. The memory of David's voice echoed in her mind from their last real conversation, 3 days before the accident. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I know, Elle. Sometimes I worry it's going to get you in trouble." He'd been teasing then, wrapped around her on their couch, his hand resting on her still flat belly. Now his words felt prophetic. A movement in the third-floor window caught her attention. A young man with dark hair was pacing back and forth, occasionally pausing to look out at the street. Marcus, she assumed, the grandson who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford the down payment on a house where his dying grandmother could spend her final months in dignity. Elena had found them through a local charity organization. She'd called Tuesday morning, asking if they knew of any families struggling with medical expenses. The volunteer, Mrs. Chen, had seemed surprised by the request, but had mentioned the Reeves family after Elena explained she wanted to help anonymously. "The boy's been calling every realtor in town," Mrs. Chen had said. "His grandmother has maybe 3 months, and she just wants to see a garden again. Breaks your heart." Elena touched her stomach, where the smallest curve was just beginning to show. 16 weeks along, and every day she wondered how she'd raise this child alone. The inheritance from David's life insurance had felt like blood money, compensation for a future that would never exist. Using it to help someone else felt like the only way to honor his memory without drowning in her own grief. She climbed out of the car and walked toward the building. The lobby smelled like disinfectant and old carpet. No elevator, so she took the stairs, her hand trailing along the worn banister. By the time she reached the 3rd floor, her heart was racing. Whether from the climb or nerves, she couldn't tell. Apartment 3B. She knocked softly. Footsteps approached, then stopped. She could sense someone looking through the peephole. "Marcus Reeves?" she called. "I'm Elena Vasquez. Mrs. Chen from the Community Hope Foundation gave me your information." The door opened slowly, revealing a man about her age, with tired eyes and paint-stained hands. He was taller than she'd expected, with the kind of lean build that came from physical work rather than gym memberships. "I don't understand," he said. "Mrs. Chen said someone wanted to help, but she was vague about the details. May I come in? I'd like to meet your grandmother." Marcus hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was small but meticulously clean. An elderly woman sat in a wheelchair by the window, a patchwork quilt across her lap. Despite her obvious frailty, her eyes were sharp and alert. "Grandmother, this is Elena Vasquez," Marcus said. The old woman extended a trembling hand. "Call me Rose, dear. Marcus, get the lady some tea." "That's not necessary," Elena began, but Rose waved her quiet. "Nonsense. When someone takes the trouble to visit, We offer hospitality. As Marcus moved to the kitchen, Elena sat in the chair beside Rose's wheelchair. The older woman studied her with surprising intensity. "You're pregnant," Rose said. It wasn't a question. Elena's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "Yes, about 4 months. And the father? He died. Car accident." Rose's expression softened. "I'm sorry, child. Loss leaves holes in us that never quite heal." She paused, watching Marcus in the kitchen. "But sometimes those holes let in light we wouldn't have seen otherwise." Marcus returned with tea in mismatched cups. He sat on the couch across from them, still looking confused about Elena's presence. "Mrs. Chen told me about your situation," Elena said carefully. "About wanting to find a house with a garden." "We've been looking," Marcus said, his jaw tightening. "But the down payments, everything's so expensive now." Elena reached into her purse and pulled out the cashier's check. She'd filled it out that morning, her hand shaking as she wrote the amount. "I'd like to help with that." She handed the check to Marcus, who looked at it for a long moment before his face went pale. This can't be right." "The amount? It's right. But why?" Rose asked quietly. "You don't know us." Elena looked between them. This young man carrying an impossible burden, this dying woman whose only wish was to see flowers grow again. "Because kindness shouldn't be complicated," she said. Neither of them spoke. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. The coffee shop on Maple Street buzzed with the usual morning energy, but Sarah felt like she was watching it all through glass. She'd barely slept, her mind churning over the strange encounter with Marcus Webb and his dying grandmother. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she saw the desperation in his face, heard the trembling in his voice when he'd spoken about losing the only family he had left. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her belly. The baby wasn't showing yet, but she felt the presence constantly now. A tiny life depending on her decisions. James would have told her she was being impulsive, that she needed to think things through. But James wasn't here to offer his careful, measured advice anymore. The bell above the door chimed, and Marcus walked in, scanning the room until his eyes found hers. He looked worse than yesterday, hollow-eyed, his clothes wrinkled as if he'd slept in them. When he slid into the booth across from her, she caught the faint smell of cigarettes and anxiety. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, his fingers drumming nervously against the scarred wooden table. "I almost didn't." Sarah studied his face, searching for something she couldn't name. "Tell me about your grandmother." Marcus's expression softened, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely peaceful. "Elena raised me after my parents died. Car accident when I was 8. She is the strongest person I know. Came here from Romania with nothing, worked 3 jobs to put my father through school." His voice cracked slightly. "She deserves better than dying in some state facility." Sarah felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that came with recognizing grief in others. "What kind of house are you looking for?" "There's a place on Birch Lane. Small, 1 story, perfect for her wheelchair. The owner's motivated to sell quickly." Marcus pulled out a crumpled piece of paper with an address scrawled on it. "It's nothing fancy, but it has a garden." She always talked about having a garden again. The practical voice in Sarah's head, the one that sounded suspiciously like James, whispered warnings about wire fraud and elaborate cons. But when she looked at Marcus, all she saw was a man fighting to give his grandmother dignity in her final months. "How much?" she asked quietly. 250,000. "I know it's a lot, but I'll do it." Marcus went very still. "What?" "I'll buy the house. For your grandmother." The words came out steady, certain, even though her heart was racing. "But I have conditions." He leaned forward, hope flickering in his tired eyes. "Anything. I meet her first, and I handle all the paperwork through my lawyer. Everything above board, everything documented." "Of course, yes." "God, Sarah, I can't." I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. If something doesn't feel right, I walk away. Marcus nodded eagerly, pulling out his phone. Can we go now? She's having a good day, more alert than usual. She'd love to meet you. 30 minutes later, Sarah followed Marcus through the sterile corridors of Sunset Manor, the smell of disinfectant and industrial food making her stomach turn. They stopped outside room 237, and Marcus knocked gently before pushing open the door. The woman in the bed was tiny, bird-like, with silver hair braided down one shoulder, but her dark eyes were sharp, intelligent, tracking Sarah's movement as she entered the room. "Bunica, this is Sarah, the woman I told you about," Marcus said softly, using what Sarah assumed was the Romanian word for grandmother. Elena's gaze moved between them, and she said something in rapid Romanian that made Marcus flush. "What did she say?" Sarah asked. "She wants to know if you're the pregnant one with the dead husband." Sarah's breath caught. "You told her about—" "I told her you understood loss. She says—" Marcus listened as Elena spoke again, her voice gaining strength. "She says grief recognizes grief, and that you have a good heart but tired eyes." Elena reached out a trembling hand, and Sarah found herself moving closer, letting the old woman's fingers close around hers. Elena's skin was paper-thin but warm, and when she spoke in accented English, her voice carried decades of wisdom. "You do this kindness for stranger, yes? But kindness is never wasted, child. It comes back when you need most." Something in Elena's tone sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Not fear exactly, but the sense that this moment mattered more than she understood. "Tell me about the house," Sarah said, settling into the chair beside the bed. Elena's eyes lit up, and for the next hour she described the garden she would plant, the birds she would feed, the peace she would find in her final months. By the time Sarah left, she knew she'd already made her decision. She was going to buy Elena Webb a house. She had no idea she was also buying herself a nightmare. The call came at 3:17 a.m., jarring Maya from the first peaceful sleep she'd managed in weeks. She fumbled for her phone in the darkness, her heart already racing with the kind of dread that only came with late-night phone calls. "Maya Chen?" The voice was crisp, professional, tinged with the practiced compassion of someone who delivered bad news for a living. "Yes? This is Detective Sarah Martinez with the LAPD. I'm calling about Eleanor Whitmore. You're listed as her emergency contact." Maya sat up, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "Is she okay? What happened?" "Ma'am, Mrs. Whitmore was found unconscious in her home approximately 2 hours ago. She's been transported to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The paramedics said she appears to have suffered some kind of accident." The words felt surreal, floating in the darkness of her bedroom like fragments of someone else's nightmare. Maya had spoken to Eleanor just yesterday afternoon, finalizing the last details of the house purchase. The elderly woman had sounded tired but excited, talking about which room would make the best reading nook. "I'll be right there," Maya said, already reaching for the clothes she'd discarded on the chair. The hospital corridors at 4 in the morning possessed an otherworldly quality, fluorescent lights humming over polished floors that reflected nothing but emptiness. Maya found Detective Martinez waiting outside the ICU, a woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Mrs. Chen, thank you for coming so quickly." The detective's handshake was firm, her gaze assessing. "I have to ask, what's your relationship to Mrs. Whitmore? It's unusual for someone to list a virtual stranger as their emergency contact." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. Put that way, her connection to Eleanor did sound strange, almost suspicious. "We met recently. I'm helping her buy a house. She said she didn't have anyone else." "Helping her buy a house?" Detective Martinez pulled out a small notebook. "Are you a real estate agent?" "No, I'm paying for it. The house. It's hard to explain." The detective's eyebrows rose slightly, but before she could respond, a doctor in scrubs approached them. Dr. Patel looked exhausted, his usually steady hands trembling slightly as he consulted his tablet. "Are you here for Eleanor Whitmore?" When Maya nodded, he continued, "She's stable, but it was close. We found significant levels of digitalis in her system." "Digitalis?" Maya repeated. "It's derived from foxglove plants. In small doses, it's used to treat heart conditions. In larger doses—" Dr. Patel's expression darkened. "Let's just say Mrs. Whitmore is very lucky her neighbor found her when she did." Detective Martinez stepped forward. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, is this consistent with accidental ingestion?" "Possible, but unlikely. Mrs. Whitmore isn't on any cardiac medications, and the levels we found suggest a substantial dose. We're running additional tests." Maya felt the floor seem to shift beneath her feet. "Are you saying someone poisoned her?" "We're exploring all possibilities," Detective Martinez said carefully. "Mrs. Chen, I'm going to need you to come down to the station later today to give a formal statement, and I'll need details about this house purchase." After the detective left, Maya sat beside Eleanor's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of the old woman's chest. Eleanor looked impossibly frail against the white hospital sheets. Her silver hair spread across the pillow like spun moonlight. Machines beeped softly, marking time in the antiseptic quiet. Maya found herself thinking about the phone call she'd received the day before, the one that had made her skin crawl. A man's voice, smooth and cold. "You should be more careful about the company you keep, Mrs. Chen. Some people aren't who they seem to be." She'd hung up immediately, assuming it was some kind of scam. Now, sitting in the harsh hospital lighting, that voice echoed in her memory with sinister new meaning. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Accidents happen to people who don't mind their own business, especially pregnant women." Maya's blood turned to ice. She looked around the ICU, suddenly aware of every shadow, every sound. The text had come from a blocked number, leaving no trace of its sender. With shaking fingers, she forwarded the message to Detective Martinez, then called hospital security. As she waited for them to arrive, Maya stared down at Eleanor's peaceful face and wondered what she had stumbled into. All she'd wanted was to honor David's memory by helping a stranger. Instead, she seemed to have painted a target on both their backs. The baby kicked, a small flutter of movement that reminded Maya she wasn't just risking her own life anymore. Whatever secret Eleanor's family was hiding, whatever had led to this moment, Maya was now part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. The coffee shop buzzed with morning energy, but Elena felt like she was moving through fog. 3 days had passed since she'd helped Marcus secure the house for his grandmother, and something gnawed at her, a persistent unease she couldn't shake. She'd barely slept, haunted by dreams of her mother's warnings about trusting too easily. Her phone buzzed against the marble tabletop. "Marcus!" "Elena, I can't thank you enough. Grandmother moved in yesterday, and she's already so much happier. The nurses say her spirits have lifted considerably." She smiled despite her exhaustion. "That's wonderful news. I was hoping we could meet today. There's something I'd like to discuss with you, and I have something of my grandmother's she'd like you to have." Elena hesitated. The rational part of her mind whispered caution, but the larger part, the part still raw from loss and desperate to find meaning, overruled it. "Of course. Where would you like to meet?" "How about Riverside Park, near the old oak grove? It's quiet there, and Grandmother always said it reminded her of home." An hour later, Elena walked through the dappled sunlight filtering through ancient branches. The park was nearly empty, except for a jogger in the distance and an elderly man feeding pigeons. She found Marcus sitting on a weathered bench, his usually composed demeanor replaced by something more vulnerable. "You look tired," she observed, settling beside him. He ran a hand through his dark hair. Family situations can be complicated. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Grandmother insisted you have this. It belonged to her mother. Elena opened the box to reveal a delicate silver locket, its surface etched with intricate vine patterns. Marcus, I can't accept this. It's too precious. She was adamant. Said you reminded her of someone she once knew. His voice carried an odd weight. Someone who showed her kindness when the world seemed determined to show her cruelty. As Elena lifted the locket, she noticed Marcus scanning the surrounding trees with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. Is everything all right? Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. He turned to face her fully, his eyes serious. Have you noticed anyone following you? Anyone asking questions about our arrangement? The unease she'd been carrying crystallized into genuine fear. Why would you ask that? Because my grandmother's past is complicated, and I'm worried that helping us might have put you in an uncomfortable position. Before Elena could respond, she noticed the elderly man with the pigeons had moved closer, though he seemed focused on his birds. Still, something about his positioning felt deliberate. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. My grandmother fled Eastern Europe after the war. She came here with nothing but the clothes on her back and secrets she's never spoken about. For 70 years she's lived quietly, carefully, always looking over her shoulder. Secrets about what? Art, documents, things that people died protecting. He met her eyes. Things that people would still kill for today. Elena's hand instinctively moved to her belly, where her pregnancy was just beginning to show. Marcus, you're scaring me. I don't mean to, but I need you to understand. When we bought that house, when the paperwork was filed, when your name appeared on the transaction, he paused. It might have attracted attention from people who've been searching for my grandmother for decades. The jogger had circled back and was now stretching near a tree roughly 50 feet away, but Elena noticed he'd been at the same stretch for several minutes. His attention seemingly focused on their conversation. Are you saying I'm in danger because I helped you? I'm saying we need to be careful. Both of us. Marcus reached into his other pocket and pulled out a business card. This is a friend of mine, someone who specializes in security consulting. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call him immediately. Elena stared at the card, her mind reeling. I don't understand. If your grandmother is in danger, why didn't you just buy the house yourself? Why involve me at all? Something flickered across Marcus's face. Guilt, perhaps, or calculation. Because they know my name. They've been watching for any Marcus Kovac to surface. But a pregnant woman making a charitable donation? He shrugged. It seemed safer for everyone. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. You used me. I protected you, he countered. If I'd bought it directly, they would have found her immediately. This way, we bought time. Elena stood abruptly, the locket clutched in her fist. Time for what? To disappear again. Elena, my grandmother is 92 years old. She just wants to die in peace, in a house with windows that face the sunrise. Is that so wrong? As she looked down at him, Elena realized she was standing at a crossroads she'd never seen coming. Behind his desperate sincerity, she glimpsed something else, a chess player who'd moved her pieces without her knowledge. The question now was whether she was still playing his game or had become something more dangerous, a player in her own right. The coffee shop buzzing around them felt like another world as Sarah stared at Marcus across the small wooden table. His weathered hands wrapped around his mug like it was an anchor, and she could see the weight of whatever he was about to tell her pressing down on his shoulders. Evelyn never told you about her son, did she? Marcus began, his voice barely audible above the espresso machine's hiss. Sarah shook her head, instinctively placing a protective hand over her growing belly. The baby kicked as if sensing her unease. Thomas Whitmore. Marcus spoke the name like it left a bitter taste. Evelyn's eldest, born when she was just 17, unmarried. This was 1952, mind you. Different times. What happened to him? Marcus's eyes darted toward the window, scanning the street outside before continuing. The Whitmore family had a reputation to maintain. Old money, old values. When Evelyn got pregnant, they sent her away to have the baby in secret. She was supposed to give him up for adoption, come back home, and pretend nothing had happened. Sarah leaned forward, but she didn't. She tried to. God knows she tried. But when she held that baby, Marcus's voice cracked. She couldn't do it. So she ran, took Thomas and disappeared for 3 years. Those were the happiest years of her life, she told me. Just her and her boy, living in a tiny apartment in Chicago, working as a seamstress to make ends meet. The coffee in Sarah's cup had grown cold, but she couldn't look away from Marcus's face as the story unfolded. Her father found them eventually, had private investigators tracking her down. When they showed up at her door, they gave her an ultimatum: come home and give up the boy, or be disowned completely, cut off from everything and everyone she'd ever known. So she chose Thomas. She tried to, but her father was clever. He had connections, influence. He made sure she couldn't find work, couldn't get an apartment, couldn't even get credit at the local grocery store. Within 6 months, she was destitute. Thomas was getting sick, malnourished. She was watching her child waste away because of her pride. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes, imagining the impossible choice Evelyn had faced. The adoption agency her father chose was supposed to be reputable. A nice family in California, they said. Evelyn would never see Thomas again, but he'd have everything he needed. A good life. Marcus paused, staring into his coffee. She signed the papers on a Thursday. Thomas was taken on Friday. By Monday, she learned the truth. What truth? There was no family in California. The adoption agency was a front. Thomas had been sold to people who specialized in making children disappear, the kind of people who asked no questions and left no paper trails. Sarah's blood ran cold. You mean? Evelyn spent the next 60 years searching for him. Every private investigator, every lead, every rumor. She never found so much as a trace. It was like Thomas had never existed at all. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. Sarah struggled to process what she was hearing. But what does this have to do with me? With the house? Marcus reached across the table and grasped her hand. His palm was ice cold. 2 weeks ago, Evelyn got a call. A man claiming to be Thomas. He said he'd been looking for her his whole life, that he'd finally tracked her down. He wanted to meet her, to talk about what had happened. That should have been wonderful news. It would have been, if it was really him. But Evelyn was smart, cautious. She'd been fooled before by people trying to scam her, so she asked him questions only the real Thomas could answer. Details about their time together when he was small. Sarah's heart was racing now. And he knew things, Sarah. Things that were never written down anywhere. Things only Thomas could have known. But there was something wrong about him. Something that made Evelyn's skin crawl. She told me he sounded hollow, like he was reciting lines from a script. Do you think someone coached him? I think someone who knew the real Thomas very well coached him. Someone who wanted access to Evelyn for reasons that had nothing to do with family reunions. Sarah pulled her hand away, a chill running down her spine. Marcus, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Because 3 days after that phone call, Evelyn was dead. And now, because of your kindness, because you bought that house, whoever killed her thinks you know something. They think Evelyn told you her secrets before she died. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Sarah winced. But I don't know anything. I barely spoke to her. Marcus's expression was grim as he leaned closer. That doesn't matter now. What matters is that they think you do, and they're willing to kill to keep Thomas's story buried forever. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds as Sarah sat beside Elena's bed, watching the older woman's chest rise and fall in shallow breaths. The machines hummed their electronic lullabies, marking time in beeps and digital displays. Elena had been unconscious since the ambulance brought her in 2 days ago, her weathered face peaceful despite the oxygen mask covering her nose and mouth. Marcus hadn't left the hospital except to shower and change clothes. He sat in the corner chair, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, stubble darkening his jaw. Sarah had brought him coffee and sandwiches he barely touched, watching him wrestle with demons she couldn't name. "The doctors say she's stable," Sarah said softly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for the past hour. Marcus nodded without looking up from his grandmother's face. "She's tougher than she looks, always has been." His voice carried a weight that seemed disproportionate to the words. Sarah's phone buzzed. Detective Rivera's name appeared on the screen, and she stepped into the hallway to answer. "We found something," Rivera said without preamble. "Can you meet me at the house? Bring Marcus if he's available." "What kind of something?" "The kind that explains why someone was so interested in that property, and why they might not want certain people living there." Sarah glanced back through the doorway at Marcus, who was holding his grandmother's hand and whispering something in Spanish. "He won't want to leave her. Then come alone, but come now." The drive to Elena's house felt different in daylight. The neighborhood seemed smaller, more exposed, the shadows that had hidden threats now revealing ordinary suburban details. Rivera's unmarked car sat in the driveway beside a crime scene van, and Sarah noticed several neighbors peering from behind curtains. Rivera met her at the front door, wearing latex gloves and carrying a manila folder. "We did a more thorough search yesterday. Found a loose floorboard in the master bedroom closet." She led Sarah inside, past the overturned furniture that crime scene techs had left behind. Previous owners must have used it as a hiding spot. In the bedroom, Rivera knelt beside a section of exposed subflooring where boards had been pried up. 3 things were hidden down there. First, about $40,000 in cash, bundled in rubber bands. Old bills probably been there for years. Sarah's eyebrows rose. "40,000? Second, this." Rivera held up a small cloth bag that clinked softly. "Jewelry. Expensive pieces, some of them antique. We're having them appraised, but preliminary estimate puts them at another 30 to 40,000. So someone was hiding money and jewelry. That's not necessarily..." "Third item." Rivera's expression grew grim as she opened the manila folder. A collection of photographs and documents. Sarah, the previous owners weren't just hiding valuables, they were hiding evidence. The photographs Rivera spread across the dresser made Sarah's stomach clench. Black and white images, clearly decades old, showing what appeared to be a younger version of the house. But these weren't family snapshots. They showed people in the basement, people who looked afraid, people whose faces had been deliberately obscured in some shots while others were crystal clear. "We think this house was used as a way station," Rivera explained. "Part of some kind of trafficking operation, probably in the 70s or 80s. The documents suggest it was run by the Castellanos family, who owned the house before it went through 3 more owners and eventually got foreclosed on." Sarah picked up one of the documents, a handwritten list of names and dates. Some entries had dollar amounts beside them, others had been crossed out in red ink. "This is horrible. It gets worse. We ran the names through missing persons databases. 7 of these people were never found. The crossed-out names correspond to people who were reported missing during the time frame these documents cover." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You think they were killed?" "I think someone used this house for very bad things, and whoever was involved, or whoever inherited their secrets, doesn't want this information coming to light. When you bought the house for Elena, when new people started living here who might discover what we just discovered, someone panicked." Sarah sank onto the bed, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. But how would they even know Elena was living here? It's not like we announced it. Rivera's expression darkened. That's what worries me. Whoever is behind this has been watching the house. They knew Elena moved in. Probably knew about you too. The question is whether they got what they came for the other night, or whether they're still looking. Sarah's phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and she answered immediately. "Sarah, you need to get back here." His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Someone was just here asking questions about my grandmother. A man claiming to be from social services, but the nurses got suspicious when he couldn't provide proper identification. Where is he now? Gone. But Sarah, he knew things. About the house, about you buying it. He knew things no social worker should know." The hospital corridors felt endless as Maya hurried toward the ICU, her heart hammering against her ribs. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh, clinical white. She'd barely slept since leaving the police station, Marcus's warnings echoing in her mind like a broken record. "I stay away from the Ashford family. You're in over your head." But she couldn't abandon Eleanor now, not when the old woman had no one else, and especially not when Maya's own act of kindness had somehow set this nightmare in motion. The ICU was quieter than the rest of the hospital, filled with the steady beeping of machines and the soft whisper of ventilators. Maya found Eleanor's room and peered through the glass partition. The woman looked impossibly fragile against the white sheets, tubes snaking from her arms, an oxygen mask covering most of her face. "She's been asking for you." Maya spun around to find a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit standing behind her. He was probably in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of confident bearing that spoke of old money and older power. Something about his pale blue eyes made her skin crawl. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Maya kept her voice steady despite the alarm bells going off in her head. "Richard Ashford." He extended a manicured hand. "Eleanor's nephew. I understand you're the young woman who's been so generous to our family." Maya didn't take his hand. "How did you know I'd be here?" Richard's smile was thin, predatory. "Eleanor mentioned you might visit. She's quite fond of you, though I can't imagine why." His gaze traveled over her with undisguised disdain. "A pregnant woman with more money than sense, from what I hear." "Excuse me?" "The house purchase. Quite impulsive, don't you think? Buying property for complete strangers." He stepped closer, and Maya caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something that reminded her unpleasantly of funeral flowers. "Though I suppose grief makes people do foolish things." Maya's blood turned to ice. She'd never told Eleanor about losing the baby, and she was certain David wouldn't have shared that information. "How do you know about that?" "I make it my business to know about people who involve themselves with my family." Richard's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Eleanor is a confused old woman. The medication, you understand. She imagines threats where none exist." "Are you saying someone didn't break into the house? That she didn't end up here because someone pushed her down the stairs?" Richard's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "I'm saying accidents happen, especially to elderly people living alone in houses they can't properly maintain." Through the glass, Maya saw Eleanor's eyes flutter open. The old woman's gaze found hers immediately, and even with the oxygen mask, Maya could see the fear there. Eleanor's hand lifted slightly, fingers stretching toward the window. Richard's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "That house has been in our family for generations. Eleanor had no right to sell it to you, and we both know it. She owned it free and clear. I had lawyers verify." "Lawyers can be wrong. Paperwork can be misleading." He stepped even closer, close enough that Maya could see the network of broken blood vessels in his eyes. "The smart thing to do would be to sell the house back to us. For what you paid, of course. plus a reasonable profit for your trouble. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her stomach, to the barely visible curve where her baby was growing. And if I don't, then you might find yourself in the same position as Eleanor. Accidents, as I said, can happen to anyone. The threat hung in the air between them like poison gas. Maya felt every muscle in her body tense, fight or flight responses flooding her system. But underneath the fear was something else, a burning anger that this man thought he could intimidate her, could threaten her and her unborn child over a property dispute. Are you threatening me, Mr. Ashford? I'm offering you sound advice. Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. My attorney's information. When you're ready to be reasonable, call him. He started to walk away, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Maya, I'd be very careful about the people you trust. David Chen, for instance. You might want to ask him why he was so eager to help you buy that particular house. The words hit her like a physical blow. Richard's smile widened as he watched her reaction. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Maya stared at the business card in her trembling hand, her world tilting on its axis once again. The hospital corridors felt like a maze of antiseptic white walls and muffled conversations. Sarah's hands trembled as she followed the nurse toward the ICU, each step echoing the frantic rhythm of her heartbeat. The phone call had come at 3 a.m. Marcus was in critical condition after what police were calling a suspicious accident. She found him unconscious, his face swollen beyond recognition, machines breathing for him in mechanical whispers. The doctor, a tired woman with kind eyes, explained the extent of his injuries with clinical precision that couldn't mask the gravity of the situation. Severe head trauma, internal bleeding, they were doing everything they could. The police want to speak with you, the doctor said softly. When you're ready. Sarah wasn't ready for anything. She pulled a chair close to Marcus's bed and took his bandaged hand in hers, careful not to disturb the IV lines. I'm here, she whispered, though she wasn't sure he could hear her. I'm so sorry. Detective Rivera appeared in the doorway an hour later, her expression somber. Mrs. Chen? I'm sorry to disturb you, but we need to discuss what happened to Mr. Rodriguez. They moved to a small family conference room where Sarah learned that Marcus had been found at the bottom of his apartment building's stairwell. His injuries suggested he'd been pushed, not fallen. Security cameras had been mysteriously disabled that evening, and his apartment had been ransacked. Did he mention feeling threatened recently? Anyone following him? Rivera asked. Sarah's throat tightened. He was helping me with something, looking into the family that owned my house before the Washingtons. She explained about Elena's strange reaction to the address, the old photographs, and Marcus's research into the property records. Rivera's pen stopped moving. What address? 15 Maple Street. The detective's expression shifted, becoming sharper, more focused. Mrs. Chen, that property has come up in our cold case files. There was an unsolved disappearance there in 1987. A teenage girl named Cristina Valdez vanished without a trace. The room seemed to tilt. Sarah gripped the armrest of her chair. Elena mentioned that name. She said Cristina was her cousin. We need to bring Elena Washington in for questioning immediately. Do you know where she is? Sarah's blood ran cold. She's at the house with Mrs. Washington. I left them there this morning when I got the call about Marcus. They drove to Maple Street with sirens wailing, Rivera radioing for backup, while Sarah sat rigid in the passenger seat, her mind racing through the implications. How had her simple act of kindness led to this nightmare? Marcus was fighting for his life because she'd dragged him into whatever dark history surrounded that house. The front door stood ajar when they arrived. Rivera drew her weapon and motioned for Sarah to stay behind as they approached. The living room was empty, Mrs. Washington's oxygen tank abandoned beside her chair, still hissing softly. Mrs. Washington? Sarah called out, pushing past Rivera's restraining arm. They found the elderly woman in the kitchen, sitting at the table with her hands folded calmly in her lap. She looked up at them with clear, alert eyes that held none of the confusion Sarah had grown accustomed to. "I've been waiting for you," Mrs. Washington said. Her voice was steady, completely lucid. "I suppose it's time." Rivera kept her weapon drawn but lowered. "Where's Elena, Mrs. Washington?" "Gone. She left an hour ago when she saw the police cars at the Rodriguez boys' building from the upstairs window." The old woman's gaze found Sarah. "You poor child. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, do you?" Sarah's legs felt weak. "The dementia. You've been pretending." "Not pretending entirely. The mind is a funny thing. It protects you from memories too painful to bear. But when Elena brought those photographs, when she started talking about selling this house," Mrs. Washington's composure cracked slightly. "Some memories refuse to stay buried." Rivera holstered her weapon and pulled out her phone. "I need to put out a bolo on Elena Washington," she said into the device before turning back to the old woman. "Mrs. Washington, I need you to tell me about Cristina Valdez." The silence stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the woman had retreated back into the fog of her illness. But then Mrs. Washington spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cristina was my granddaughter, not Elena's cousin, mine. She lived here with me that summer in 1987. Tears began to fall down the weathered cheeks. Elena was jealous, you see. Always had been. Cristina was beautiful, smart, kind, everything Elena wanted to be but wasn't." Sarah sank into a chair across from her, understanding beginning to dawn like a cold sunrise. "Elena killed her," Mrs. Washington continued, "right here in this house, and I helped her hide it." The rain hammered against the hospital windows as Sarah sat beside Marcus's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. 3 days had passed since the attack, and while the doctors assured her his injuries weren't life-threatening, he remained unconscious. The bruising around his temples had deepened to an ugly purple, and his left arm was encased in a cast from wrist to elbow. Detective Riley had stationed an officer outside the room, but Sarah felt far from safe. Every footstep in the hallway made her jump. Every whispered conversation between nurses sent ice through her veins. She pressed her hand to her growing belly, feeling the baby's restless movements, and wondered what kind of world she was bringing her child into. "Any change?" Dr. Patterson entered quietly, clipboard in hand. Sarah shook her head. "He moved his fingers this morning, but that's all." The doctor checked Marcus's chart, then his pupils with a small flashlight. "The swelling is going down. These things take time, especially with head trauma. Try not to worry too much. Stress isn't good for the baby." Easy for him to say. Sarah hadn't slept properly since finding Marcus crumpled on the floor of what should have been Elena Vasquez's sanctuary. The house she'd bought with such hope had become a crime scene, yellow tape cordoning off the rooms where she'd imagined Elena spending her final days in peace. After Dr. Patterson left, Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through the messages that had been piling up. Her sister Claire had called 6 times, increasingly frantic. Her boss wanted to know when she'd be back at work, but it was the text from an unknown number that made her blood run cold. "Stop digging, or the next one won't survive." Her hands trembled as she screenshot the message. She should call Detective Riley immediately, but something held her back. Riley had been asking pointed questions about her inheritance, about why she'd really bought the house. There was a skepticism in his eyes that suggested he thought she was hiding something, and maybe she was. The full truth about her mother's journal, about the cryptic references to Elena's debt that had driven her to find the old woman. She hadn't shared any of that. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Elena Vasquez stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on a walker, her grandson Diego supporting her arm. "I had to come," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I heard what happened, this is my fault." Sarah stood quickly. "Mrs. Vasquez, you shouldn't be here. You should be resting." "No." Elena's eyes were fierce despite her frailty. 40 years I've carried this secret, and now good people are paying the price. You saved my life, mija, and I've repaid you with danger. Diego helped his grandmother to the visitor's chair. Up close, Sarah could see the family resemblance. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn set to their jaws. But where Elena carried the weight of years and secrets, Diego seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy. Abuela, you don't have to do this, he said softly. Yes, I do. Elena reached for Sarah's hand. Your mother, Anna, she tried to help me before. She found out about the money, about what Vincent did, and she tried to make it right. That's why she died. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sarah gripped the bedrail to steady herself. What are you talking about? My mother died in a car accident. Elena's laugh was bitter. Accidents are convenient when you have enough money to arrange them. Vincent Castellano has been cleaning up his father's messes for decades. He thought the secret died with your mother, but then you showed up, asking the same questions, making the same connections. I don't understand. What money? What secret? Diego pulled out his phone and showed Sarah a photo of a yellowed document. Property deed from 1983. Vincent's father, Anthony Castellano, stole my family's land through forged documents. 5 acres in what's now the heart of downtown, worth millions today. My grandfather tried to fight it in court, but Anthony had judges in his pocket. Your mother was a paralegal then, Elena continued. She found the original documents, the real ones that proved the land was ours. She contacted me, said she was going to expose everything. 3 days later, her brakes failed on that winding mountain road. Sarah felt the baby kick hard, as if responding to her racing heartbeat. But why now? Why come after me? Because you bought me that house, Elena said. Vincent couldn't understand why a stranger would give away so much money unless they knew something. He's been watching you, searching for any connection to your mother's investigation. When Marcus started asking questions around the neighborhood, the steady beeping of Marcus's monitors seemed to grow louder in the sudden silence. Sarah looked at his battered face and felt a rage so pure it took her breath away. Her mother's death hadn't been an accident. Her act of kindness had painted a target on everyone she loved. We have to go to the police, she said. Elena nodded slowly. Yes, but first, there's something else you need to know about Vincent Castellano. Something that makes him even more dangerous than you realize. The old woman's fingers trembled as she pressed the yellowed photograph into Maya's hands. I should have burned this years ago, Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain hammering against the cottage windows. But I couldn't. A mother never forgets her children, even the ones who... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Maya studied the faded image. A young woman holding 2 small children, their faces bright with innocent smiles. The woman looked remarkably like Eleanor, but decades younger. Your daughter? Maya asked gently. Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Margaret, and her children, David and Sarah. This was taken 3 days before the accident. The name hit Maya like a physical blow. David. She thought of the man who'd been watching her, following her, trying to break into her house. The pieces began clicking into place with terrifying clarity. What happened to them? There was no accident. Eleanor's voice hardened. Charles killed them. My own son murdered his sister and her babies because of what she knew. Maya's blood ran cold. What did she know? Eleanor reached under her bed with shaking hands and pulled out a small metal box. Inside were more photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings. Margaret worked at the bank, where Charles was vice president. She discovered he'd been embezzling money for years, hiding it in offshore accounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Maya examined the papers, her heart racing. Bank statements, transfer records, handwritten notes in the margins. She was building a case against him. She came to me the night before she died, Said she was going to the police the next morning. Eleanor's voice broke. I begged her to be careful, told her Charles was dangerous when cornered, but she said the children deserved a father who wasn't a criminal. The car accident was staged? Charles tampered with her brakes, made it look like she lost control on the mountain road. The children were supposed to be at school that day, but Sarah was sick. Margaret kept them home. Eleanor clutched Maya's arm. He killed all three of them to protect his secret. Maya felt nauseous. The baby in her womb seemed to sense her distress, shifting restlessly. But how does this connect to me? Why is someone trying to hurt me? Eleanor's eyes filled with fresh terror. Because you bought me this house. Because you made me visible again. Charles thought I was safely hidden away in that awful nursing home, forgotten and dying. But when I moved here, when people started noticing me again, he got scared. Scared of what? That I'd finally tell someone the truth. That I'd show them what Margaret left me. Eleanor gestured to the box of evidence. She gave me copies of everything before she died. Said if anything happened to her, I should make sure justice was done. Maya's mind raced. Why didn't you go to the police years ago? I tried. But Charles had connections, friends in high places. They said I was a grieving old woman making wild accusations. Said there was no evidence of foul play. Eleanor's hands shook as she sorted through the papers. But I kept Margaret's evidence all these years, waiting for the right moment. A loud crash from downstairs made them both freeze. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as footsteps echoed through the cottage. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving closer. He's here, Eleanor whispered, terror stark in her eyes. Maya grabbed the box of evidence and helped Eleanor to her feet. Is there another way out? The back stairs. They lead to the kitchen. They moved as quietly as possible, Eleanor's arthritis making each step painful. The footsteps below had stopped, which somehow made it worse. Maya strained to hear any sound that might indicate where the intruder was. As they reached the kitchen, Maya saw a shadow pass by the window. Someone was circling the house, checking all exits. They were trapped. Eleanor pressed a key into Maya's palm. The storm cellar. Behind the house, hidden under the rose bushes. Take the evidence and run. I'm not leaving you. You have to. You're carrying a child, and someone needs to make sure the truth comes out. Eleanor's grip was surprisingly strong. Charles has already killed 3 people. He won't hesitate to kill again. The front door creaked open. Maya heard careful footsteps entering the cottage, then Charles's voice calling out in a mockingly sweet tone. Mother, I know you're here, and I know you have a visitor. Maya's blood turned to ice. She looked at Eleanor, seeing her own fear reflected in the old woman's eyes. The evidence box felt heavy in her hands, heavy with the weight of 3 deaths and the promise of justice. Go, Eleanor mouthed silently. The footsteps were climbing the stairs now. Maya squeezed Eleanor's hand once, then slipped out the back door into the storm, clutching the proof of Charles's crimes and praying she could reach safety before he discovered they were gone. The basement of the Meridian real estate office smelled like mildew and forgotten paperwork. Elena's hands shook as she rifled through filing cabinets that hadn't been touched in years, searching for anything that might explain why Margaret's house had become the center of a deadly game she didn't understand. There has to be something here, she whispered, her voice echoing in the cramped space. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her urgency. She'd broken in through the back entrance after watching Thomas Meridian leave for what she hoped was an extended lunch. The receptionist had followed 10 minutes later, leaving the building empty except for Elena and whatever secrets lay buried in these files. The cabinet marked 1995 to 2000 stuck when she tried to open it. Elena pulled harder, and it finally gave way with a screech that made her freeze, listening for footsteps above. When silence returned, she began pulling out folders with trembling fingers. Halfway through the drawer, she found it, A thick file labeled Clearwater Development Project, confidential. Inside were architectural plans, environmental reports, and correspondence between Meridian Real Estate and something called Blackstone Industries. The dates spanned from 1998 to 2001. Elena spread the papers across the dusty floor, her phone's flashlight illuminating what looked like plans for a massive housing development. The proposed site was clearly marked on a map that made her blood run cold. The entire Willowbrook neighborhood where Margaret's house stood was outlined in red, labeled Acquisition Zone, Priority 1. A letter from Blackstone Industries, dated 6 months before David's supposed accident, outlined the project's scope: 200 luxury homes, a golf course, and a shopping complex. The projected profits were staggering. At the bottom, a handwritten note in what she now recognized as Thomas Meridian's careful script: Henderson property remains problematic. Suggest alternative persuasion methods. Elena's hands went numb. Henderson, Margaret's maiden name, which she'd mentioned only once in passing. She photographed every document with shaking hands, then dug deeper into the file. What she found next made her stomach lurch. A series of payments to someone identified only as MC for consultation services. Payments that continued monthly right up until last year. The amounts were substantial. Enough to buy silence. Enough to buy loyalty. Enough to buy murder. The sound of a car door slamming outside sent Elena into a panic. She shoved the documents back into the folder and crammed it into the filing cabinet, but her pregnant belly made quick movements impossible. Footsteps echoed on the stairs above her head. She killed the flashlight and pressed herself against the far wall, behind a stack of boxes that reeked of mouse droppings. The basement door opened with a creak that seemed to last forever. "I know you're down there, Elena." Thomas Meridian's voice was calm, almost conversational. Light flooded the basement as he flicked on the overhead bulb. "You've been asking a lot of questions lately, making people nervous." His footsteps were measured, deliberate. "I had hoped we could avoid this conversation." Elena held her breath, one hand protectively covering her belly. Through a gap in the boxes, she could see his polished shoes moving slowly across the concrete floor. "The thing about small towns," he continued, "is that everyone knows everyone's business, including when a pregnant woman starts playing detective." He paused near the filing cabinet she'd been searching. "Mrs. Patterson from the diner mentioned you've been asking about David Morrison. Such a tragedy, that accident." The way he said accident made Elena's skin crawl. Of course, David was always too curious for his own good, just like his grandmother. Margaret had this stubborn streak, you see, wouldn't sell when it would have been so much easier for everyone involved. Elena could see him now, standing with his back to her hiding spot. He looked older than she remembered, his usually perfect hair disheveled. "You remind me of her, actually." This misguided notion that kindness matters more than common sense. He turned suddenly, and Elena pressed herself deeper into the shadows. "But kindness has consequences, doesn't it? You thought you were helping an old woman and her grandson. Instead, you've opened a door that should have stayed closed." A new set of footsteps descended the stairs. Elena's heart hammered as she recognized the heavy tread of whoever had been following her. "Any sign of her?" The voice was gruff, unfamiliar. "She was here. Cabinet's still warm." Thomas's voice had lost its conversational tone. "Check the back exit. If she's still in the building, find her." Elena closed her eyes and tried to control her breathing. The baby seemed to sense her fear, moving restlessly. She pressed both hands against her stomach, silently pleading for stillness. She had the photos. She had proof of the conspiracy that had killed David and threatened Margaret. But first, she had to survive long enough to use it. The footsteps separated, one set moving toward the back of the basement, the other climbing the stairs. Elena counted to 60, then began inching toward the staircase, praying her luck would hold just a little longer. The safe house felt like a tomb, all beige walls and generic furniture that had witnessed too many secrets. Sarah sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her hands protectively curved around her belly, watching Detective Rodriguez pace the small room like a caged animal. Agent Chen stood motionless by the window, occasionally peering through the blinds at the empty parking lot below. "We need to talk about what happens next," Rodriguez said, finally stopping his restless movement. "Marcus Whitmore is dead, but this isn't over." Sarah's breath caught. "Dead? How?" "Car accident on Highway 9, about 2 hours after he left the hospital." Rodriguez's expression was grim. Single vehicle, no skid marks. Could be suicide. Could be murder made to look like suicide. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning unit. Sarah felt the baby flutter inside her, as if responding to her spike of anxiety. Nothing felt real anymore. Not the sterile safety of this place, not the casual way Rodriguez spoke about death, not the fact that her simple act of kindness had somehow led to this nightmare. "There are others involved," Chen said without turning from the window. "Marcus was just middle management in this operation. The real power players are still out there, and they know you're a threat." "A threat to what, exactly?" Sarah's voice cracked. "I still don't understand what I stumbled into." Rodriguez pulled out a file folder, thick with documents and photographs. Eleanor Hartwell wasn't just some dying old woman. She was the bookkeeper for one of the largest money-laundering operations on the East Coast. For 30 years, she kept meticulous records of every transaction, every payment, every dirty dollar that flowed through a network of shell companies and fake charities. He spread several documents across the small table. Sarah recognized Eleanor's careful handwriting, but the numbers and codes meant nothing to her. When Eleanor got sick, she started having second thoughts about her legacy, Chen continued. "Our sources indicate she was planning to turn state's evidence in exchange for immunity. The family couldn't let that happen. But why involve me? Why not just—" Sarah couldn't finish the thought. "Kill her outright." Rodriguez's laugh was bitter. Too obvious. Eleanor was under surveillance by multiple agencies. A sudden death would have triggered investigations. But if she died peacefully in a home purchased by a kind stranger, surrounded by loving family? He shrugged. "Natural causes. Case closed." Sarah felt sick. "They used me to make murder look like mercy." "The morphine drip was already in place when you bought the house," Chen said. "Marcus was administering lethal doses disguised as pain management. Your presence provided the perfect cover story. A beautiful narrative about human kindness that would deflect any suspicion." The baby kicked hard and Sarah winced. Everything inside her rebelled against the ugliness of what she was hearing. She had wanted to honor her mother's memory by helping someone in need. Instead, she had enabled a calculated killing. "There's more," Rodriguez said quietly. "Eleanor left something for you." He pulled out a small velvet jewelry box. Inside was an antique locket, tarnished silver with delicate engravings. Sarah opened it to find 2 photographs, one of Eleanor as a young woman, radiant and hopeful, and another of a man Sarah didn't recognize. "Her first husband," Chen explained. "He died in Korea. Eleanor told the nurses she wanted you to have this because you reminded her of the person she used to be, before everything went wrong." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Even in the midst of unimaginable moral compromise, Eleanor had recognized something genuine in their brief connection. It made the violation feel even more profound. "We found this, hidden inside the locket's backing." Rodriguez handed her a small piece of paper with numbers written in Eleanor's shaky handwriting. "We think it's an account number, possibly offshore. Eleanor might have been trying to give you more than just a keepsake." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. She was trying to protect me, to give me resources to fight back. "Or to disappear," Chen said grimly. These people don't forgive and forget. They've invested too much in keeping this operation secret. Sarah closed the locket and held it tight. Through the window, she could see storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Everything felt poised on the edge of something terrible and inevitable. "What are my options?" she asked. Rodriguez and Chen exchanged a look that told her everything she needed to know. There were no good options, no clean endings, no way to go back to the simple life she had imagined for herself and her unborn child. "We can try to build a case," Rodriguez said carefully, "but that means staying visible, staying vulnerable, being bait." Sarah felt the weight of Eleanor's locket in her palm, warm and solid. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled like a warning. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like stepping into a tomb. Sarah's footsteps echoed against concrete walls as she followed the directions Marcus had given her, each sound amplifying her growing dread. The manila envelope clutched in her sweaty palm contained copies of everything: bank records, property deeds, the forged inheritance documents that had started this nightmare. She'd insisted on meeting here after Marcus called, claiming he had proof of who was really behind the attempts on her life. The isolated location made her skin crawl, but she was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder every moment since discovering the truth about Elena's family. "Marcus?" Her voice bounced off empty shipping containers, stacked like metal monuments. Dust motes danced in shafts of dying sunlight that filtered through broken windows high above. A figure emerged from behind a rusted forklift, but it wasn't Marcus. "Hello, Sarah." Detective Reynolds stepped into the light, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his service weapon hung loose in his right hand. Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Where's Marcus?" "Safe. For now." Reynolds gestured with the gun toward a makeshift seating area, two metal chairs facing each other like an interrogation setup. "We need to talk. You're the one." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. "You've been working with them, with Elena's family." Reynolds laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the cavernous space. "Working with them? Sarah, I am them. Elena Castillo is my niece." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. She thought of all the times Reynolds had been one step ahead, how he'd known details about her movements, about the house, about everything. "You've been protecting the family's secret, protecting my family's future." He motioned again toward the chairs. "Sit, please. I don't want to hurt you or your baby, but I will if you force my hand." Sarah remained standing, calculating distances to the exits, the drug money, the property investments. "You helped them launder everything through real estate purchases. My brother, Elena's father, he was brilliant but naive. Started small, just trying to provide for his family after they came here with nothing. The business grew, became more than he could handle alone. When the authorities got close, we had to get creative. So you became a cop to stay ahead of investigations." "I became a cop to serve justice. But family comes first, Sarah. Always." Reynolds' grip tightened on the weapon. "When you bought that house, you didn't just purchase property. You bought into our family's legacy, our survival mechanism. That house was supposed to disappear into city foreclosure, be demolished for development. Instead, you made it visible again." Sarah's mind raced. "The mortgage papers I signed, there was something hidden in them. Power of attorney clauses, financial liability transfers, very legal, very binding. Your inheritance money didn't just buy the house. It bought you a partnership in 30 years of carefully structured financial arrangements. Arrangements that certain people would kill to keep buried." The baby kicked, as if responding to Sarah's elevated heart rate. She pressed a hand to her stomach, thinking of David, of the future they'd planned. "I just wanted to help an old woman. And that kindness is going to destroy everything my family built." Reynolds' voice cracked with exhaustion. Elena's grandmother was supposed to die quietly in that nursing home. The house would be condemned, torn down, and all the paper trails would disappear with it. But you saved her, brought her home, made her comfortable enough to start talking about the old days, about things she'd seen and heard. She knows about the money. She knows everything. And now the federal task force is breathing down our necks, asking questions about properties, about suspicious transactions going back decades. They've connected the dots between 3 different cartels and 17 different real estate deals. Sarah took a step backward. You can't solve this by killing me. I can buy time. Make it look like you discovered something dangerous and got in over your head. Grieving widow, pregnancy hormones, made some bad decisions trying to honor her dead husband's memory. Reynolds stood, the metal chair scraping against concrete. The paperwork you signed makes you liable for the family's debts. Your death would transfer everything back to Elena. Clean slate. Marcus knows I'm here. Marcus is tied up in a storage unit across town. He'll be found eventually. Probably too late to help you, but soon enough to corroborate the story about how you'd been acting erratically, meeting with dangerous people. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to the cell phone in her pocket, but Reynolds noticed the motion. Don't. His voice carried the authority of years in law enforcement. I've already disabled the cell towers in this area. No calls going in or out. The warehouse suddenly felt smaller, the shadows deeper. Sarah realized she'd walked into a carefully planned trap, and the only person who might save her was an old woman who'd already survived more than anyone should have to bear. The abandoned warehouse stretched before them like a concrete tomb, its broken windows reflecting the dying light of dusk. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as Marcus led her through the maze of rusted machinery and oil-stained floors, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "She's here," Marcus whispered, pointing toward a dim light emanating from what looked like an office at the far end of the building. "Elena's been hiding here since she escaped from the hospital." Sarah pressed her hand to her swollen belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but Elena held the final pieces of the puzzle that had consumed her life for weeks. The truth about the Hartwell family, about the inheritance, about why her simple act of kindness had unleashed such deadly consequences. They approached the office cautiously, the fluorescent light inside casting harsh shadows through the grimy windows. Marcus reached for the door handle, then froze. The metallic click of a gun being cocked cut through the silence. "I was wondering when you'd find me," Elena's voice drifted from inside, unnaturally calm. "Come in, both of you." Slowly. The office was sparse. A folding table, 2 chairs, and Elena sitting behind a laptop computer, a pistol trained steadily on the doorway. But it wasn't the gun that made Sarah's breath catch. It was Elena's appearance. Gone was the frail, dying grandmother Sarah had met weeks ago. This woman's eyes were sharp and calculating, her posture erect despite her obvious illness. Surprised? Elena smiled, though it never reached her eyes. People see what they want to see. A sick old woman, harmless and grateful. "You made it so easy, Sarah." "I don't understand," Sarah managed, though pieces were already clicking into place with sickening clarity. "Of course you don't. You were the perfect mark, grieving, guilty, desperate to do something meaningful with blood money." Elena's finger twitched on the trigger. "Did you really think your mother's pharmaceutical fortune was clean? That the inheritance burning a hole in your conscience was earned honestly?" Marcus stepped slightly forward, shielding Sarah. "Your mother discovered the human trials, didn't she? The ones that killed dozens of people in Central America." Elena's laugh was bitter. "Brilliant woman, your mother. She found every buried report, every falsified document. She was going to expose everything, destroy the company and everyone connected to it." Her eyes fixed on Sarah with predatory intensity. "Including the Hartwells." "But the Hartwells weren't involved in pharmaceuticals," Sarah protested weakly. "No, but they were investors. silent partners who helped fund the illegal trials in exchange for a percentage of the profits. When your mother threatened to go public, they had her killed and made it look like an accident. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Her mother's car accident, the one that had seemed so random, so cruel, it had been murder. You're lying. The proof is all here. Elena gestured to the laptop. Financial records, communications, even audio recordings. Your mother was thorough. She just wasn't careful enough. Then why? Sarah's voice cracked. Why did you let me buy you that house? Why involve me at all? Elena's expression softened slightly, the first genuine emotion Sarah had seen from her. Because I am dying, and I loved my grandson. When Victor came to me, desperate because the Hartwells were forcing him out of his inheritance to keep him quiet about what he'd discovered, I saw an opportunity. Victor knew about the trials. He found his grandfather's old files. The fool thought he could blackmail the Hartwells, but they don't pay blackmailers. They eliminate them. Elena coughed, and for a moment the frail grandmother facade returned. I needed someone above suspicion to make the house purchase, someone who could get close to the family without raising alarms. Marcus's voice was tight with controlled anger. You used her as bait. I used her as justice. Elena's grip on the gun steadied. Your generous purchase gave Victor legal claim to property that the Hartwells desperately wanted to keep buried. Literally. There are bodies on that land, Sarah. Test subjects who died in the preliminary trials before they moved operations overseas. Sarah felt the room spinning around her. Every kind gesture, every moment of connection she'd felt with Elena and Victor, all of it had been manipulation. And now they want to kill me because I can connect them to the property. They want to kill you because Victor gave you copies of everything before they murdered him. You just don't know it yet. Elena reached into her jacket with her free hand and pulled out a thick envelope. The title transfer Victor signed? There was more than just property documents in that package. The envelope hit the floor between them with a sound like a death sentence. Sarah stared at it, understanding finally flooding through her. The extra papers she'd barely glanced at, filed away in her home office. They weren't just legal formalities. Insurance, Elena said softly. Victor knew they'd kill him eventually. He made sure the evidence would survive. In the distance, the sound of car engines cut through the evening air, growing closer. The warehouse smelled of rust and abandonment, shadows stretching like dark fingers across the concrete floor. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped through the doorway, Marcus's hand pressed firmly against her lower back, guiding her forward. The metal door clanged shut behind them with a finality that made her stomach lurch. You didn't have to make this so complicated, Marcus said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. All you had to do was mind your own business. Sarah's eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through grimy windows high above. Stacks of wooden crates created a maze throughout the building, and she could hear the distant sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. Where's Elena? Safe. For now. Marcus moved around her, keeping the gun trained on her chest. That depends entirely on how cooperative you decide to be. The baby kicked, a sharp jab against her ribs that reminded her of everything she had to lose. She placed a protective hand over her belly, trying to project calm she didn't feel. What do you want from me? The same thing I've wanted from the beginning. Your silence. Marcus's face was hard, all traces of the charming man from the coffee shop gone. You see, my family has worked very hard to build our reputation in this city. My father's construction company, our investments, our standing in the community. We can't have some bleeding heart do-gooder destroying everything we've built. I don't understand. I bought a house for an old woman. How does that threaten anything? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. That house sits on land we need, land we've been trying to acquire for 3 years. Do you have any idea how much money is involved in the downtown development project? We're talking about $50 million in contracts. Sarah's mind raced, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. You've been trying to force Elena out. The break-ins, the harassment. Elena Reyes is a stubborn old woman who refused to see reason. We offered her fair market value. More than fair, actually, but she wouldn't sell. Said the house had too much sentimental value. Marcus's voice dripped with contempt. Sentiment doesn't pay bills or fund city projects. So you decided to terrorize an elderly woman instead? We decided to make her understand reality. Most people, when they realize they're not safe in their homes, when they understand they're not wanted in a neighborhood, they take the hint. They take the money and leave. Marcus began pacing, his agitation growing. But not Elena. She dug in deeper. And then you came along with your inheritance money and your need to play savior. The sound of a car door slamming somewhere outside made Marcus freeze. He moved quickly to one of the windows, peering through the grime. Sarah considered running, but there was nowhere to go. The warehouse was vast, but appeared to have only one exit, and Marcus stood between her and freedom. "Expecting someone?" she asked, hoping to keep him talking. "My associates should be handling the Elena situation by now." Marcus returned his attention to her, and Sarah felt ice in her veins. "Don't look so horrified. This could have all been avoided if you'd just minded your own business. You can't just kill people because they're inconvenient. You'd be surprised what people can do when enough money is involved, when enough people are counting on you to deliver." Marcus's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with a frown. The mayor's office, the city council, the development board, they're all waiting for this project to move forward, waiting for the Reyes property to become available. Sarah felt a surge of anger that momentarily overrode her fear. "So, you decided murder was easier than finding another piece of land?" "There is no other piece of land. The development requires that entire city block. Without it, the whole project falls apart, and my family loses everything we've invested." Marcus's voice rose, echoing off the warehouse walls. $50 million, Sarah. Jobs for hundreds of people, a revitalization project that will transform the entire downtown area. And you want to throw all of that away for one selfish old woman? Elena isn't selfish. That house is her home. Elena is dead weight, and so are you. Marcus raised the gun, his finger moving to the trigger. The warehouse door suddenly exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood and twisted metal. Marcus spun toward the sound, his weapon swinging away from Sarah as figures in dark tactical gear poured through the opening. "Drop your weapon, now!" Sarah dove behind the nearest stack of crates as chaos erupted around her. Shouts filled the air, boots pounded against concrete, and somewhere in the darkness, Marcus was screaming orders that no one was following. She curled into a ball, protecting her belly, and prayed that Elena was still alive somewhere in the city, waiting to go home to the house that love had bought her. The basement beneath Elena's childhood home felt like a tomb, its stone walls weeping with decades of moisture and secrets. Maya pressed herself against the cold concrete, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as she listened to the footsteps above. Elena paced the kitchen floor with methodical precision, each step echoing through the floorboards like a countdown. The baby kicked hard against Maya's ribs, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them. She placed a protective hand over her belly, whispering silent promises that she would find a way out of this nightmare. The rope binding her wrists had loosened slightly during her struggles, and she worked at it with desperate determination, ignoring the burn of the coarse fibers against her skin. Marcus lay unconscious in the corner, blood matting his dark hair where Elena had struck him with the iron poker. His breathing was shallow but steady, and Maya took comfort in the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. She had to get them both out before Elena decided they were too dangerous to keep alive. The footsteps stopped directly overhead, followed by the creak of the basement door opening. Yellow light spilled down the wooden stairs, casting long shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts. Elena descended slowly, her silhouette framed against the brightness above. "I've been thinking about what you said upstairs." Elena's voice carried a strange calmness that made Maya's skin crawl. "About how my grandmother would be disappointed in me. You're probably right." Maya remained silent, continuing to work at the ropes while keeping her eyes fixed on Elena's face. The woman who had seemed so gentle and grateful just days ago now appeared hollow, her features sharp with desperation and something darker. "She always told me that family comes first," Elena continued, reaching the bottom of the stairs. "But she never understood what it was like to live in Thomas's shadow. Perfect Thomas, with his perfect life and his perfect opportunities. Do you know what it's like to watch someone take everything that should have been yours?" "Thomas didn't take anything," Maya said quietly. "Your grandmother chose to leave him the house because she thought I was weak." Elena's composure cracked, her voice rising to an almost hysterical pitch. "Just like my parents thought. Just like everyone thought. The forgotten daughter who couldn't even keep a marriage together." Maya felt the rope give way slightly and fought to keep her expression neutral. "So you killed him for a house?" Elena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "I killed him because he was going to expose everything. The forged documents, the manipulated medical records, the way I'd been slowly poisoning grandmother to make her more dependent on me. Thomas found the evidence when he came to visit that last time. The confession hung in the air between them like poison." Maya realized with growing horror that Elena's crimes went far deeper than simple greed. She had been systematically destroying an old woman's health to maintain control over her life and finances. "The beautiful part was how easy it became after that," Elena continued, her eyes taking on a distant quality. "One little push down those stairs, and suddenly I was the grieving granddaughter instead of the suspicious one. The inheritance was mine by right anyway." Maya's hands finally slipped free of the ropes, but she kept them positioned behind her back. She needed to choose her moment carefully. "But then I bought the house for your grandmother." "You ruined everything." Elena's mask of calm shattered completely. "Months of planning, of waiting for the perfect moment to take her somewhere I could control completely. And you gave her hope. You gave her independence. Do you have any idea how hard it's been to get her alone long enough to finish what I started?" The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Maya gasped involuntarily. Elena's attention snapped to Maya's belly, and her expression shifted to something predatory. "Though I suppose your little act of kindness will work out in the end," Elena mused. "When they find your bodies, it'll look like a tragic break-in. Two strangers who got caught up in something they couldn't understand. Your baby won't have to grow up knowing what a fool his mother was." Maya's protective instincts flared, overriding her fear. She launched herself forward, catching Elena off guard and sending them both crashing into the wall. Elena recovered quickly, but Maya was already moving toward the stairs, her only thought to reach the phone upstairs and call for help. Elena's hand closed around Maya's ankle, sending her sprawling across the concrete floor. Pain shot through her side as she hit the ground, and she curled protectively around her belly, praying the baby was unharmed. "You should have just stayed out of it," Elena panted, reaching for something in the shadows near the wall. When she turned back, Maya saw the glint of metal in her hand, a knife that caught the overhead light like a promise of violence. Behind Elena, Marcus stirred slightly, his eyes beginning to flutter open. Maya met his gaze across the basement and saw understanding pass between them. The final confrontation was about to begin. The abandoned warehouse echoed with the sound of sirens growing closer, but Elena couldn't move. She knelt beside Marcus's motionless form, her hands pressed against the growing pool of blood beneath him. The gun lay where it had fallen from his grip, knocked away when Detective Rivera tackled him to prevent the final shot. "The ambulance is coming," Rivera said, though they both knew it might be too late. Marcus's breathing was shallow, his face pale as moonlight streaming through the broken windows above. Elena's mind reeled as she tried to process everything that had unfolded in the past hour. The grandmother she'd bought a house for, sweet, frail Mrs. Chen, had been Marcus's accomplice all along. The dying woman act, the gratitude, even the tears when Elena handed over the keys, all of it had been a performance designed to hide the truth about the Hartwell family fortune. "Why?" Elena whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was asking Marcus or the universe itself. Marcus's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with surprising clarity. "Because some secrets are worth more than lives," he gasped. "The money. It was never really ours. My grandfather, he stole it from families during the war, Holocaust victims." The words hit Elena like physical blows. Her inheritance, the money she'd used to buy Mrs. Chen's house, had come from Marcus's family trust. Money built on stolen lives, hidden for decades behind legitimate business fronts and careful legal maneuvering. "Mrs. Chen, she was one of the survivors," Marcus continued, each word a struggle. "She'd been tracking the money for 60 years. When you bought her that house, you gave her the address she needed, the trust documents. They were hidden there." Elena's hands trembled as she held pressure on his wound. "So you tried to kill us both, to keep it quiet?" "Not kill," Marcus wheezed. "Just disappear. Make it look like you both left town." But she was smarter than I thought. Had copies of everything. Insurance. Detective Rivera knelt beside them, her radio crackling with updates. "Elena, I need you to know, Mrs. Chen is going to be fine. She's at the hospital, awake and talking. She's been working with federal investigators for months, building a case against the Hartwell Trust." The warehouse filled with the sound of approaching vehicles. EMTs burst through the door, their equipment cases rattling as they rushed toward Marcus. Elena reluctantly moved aside, her clothes stained with blood, her body aching from the ordeal. As the paramedics worked, Rivera explained what she'd learned. "Mrs. Chen never intended for you to get hurt. She'd been trying to find a way to expose the trust without putting innocent people in danger. When you showed up with your generous offer, she saw an opportunity but also a problem. She knew Marcus would come after anyone who got too close to the truth." Elena watched as they loaded Marcus onto a stretcher. Despite everything he'd done, despite the terror he'd put her through, she felt hollow rather than victorious. "Will he live?" "Probably," Rivera said. "He'll live to face trial for what his family did, and for what he tried to do tonight." They walked outside together, where the night air felt impossibly clean after the staleness of the warehouse. Elena's phone buzzed, a text from her doctor's office reminding her about her appointment next week. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, where her baby was growing, somehow still safe despite everything that had happened. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Mrs. Chen will testify. The federal case will move forward. The stolen money will be returned to the rightful families, or to organizations that help survivors. And you," Rivera paused, studying Elena's face in the red and blue flashing lights. "You saved an old woman's life tonight, just not in the way you thought you would." Elena laughed, though it came out more like a sob. "I just wanted to do something good, something that would matter." "It did matter," Rivera said firmly. "Your kindness gave her the courage to finally seek justice. Sometimes doing good means accepting that the consequences will be bigger and messier than we ever imagined." A month later, Elena stood in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, helping her pack the last of her belongings. The old woman was moving to be closer to her family, and the house, bought with blood money that would soon be returned to its rightful place, would be sold. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Chen said for the 100th time. I never wanted you to be hurt. Elena shook her head, folding a delicate scarf into tissue paper. You did what you had to do. I understand that now. Mrs. Chen's weathered hand covered Elena's. Your baby will grow up knowing that their mother fought for justice, even when she didn't know that's what she was doing. Elena smiled, feeling the truth of those words settle into her bones. Sometimes the most important battles were the ones you never meant to fight.